42-Trupp.
Sagen Sie dem Kommandostab, wir greifen an. Sie sollen Verstärkung schicken.
Aufteilen! Feldwebel, übernehmen Sie mit 3 Männern die Flanke. Ich gebe Ihnen Feuerschutz.
Überprüfen Sie die Waffen. Wir wollen diesmal keine Ladehemmungen. Verteilt euch! Feldwebel, übernehmen Sie mit 3 Männern die Flanke. Ich gebe Ihnen Feuerschutz.
Nein, nach unseren Informationen sind nur noch ein paar 100 übrig.
Gehen Sie in Abwehrstellung, bis wir wissen, wie viele es sind.
The stage was set on July 5th when the Germans initiated Operation Citadel. Despite encountering resilient Soviet resistance and confronting formidable defensive lines, the German offensive steadily advanced, decimating Soviet armoured divisions. However, a pivotal moment occurred on July 10th when the 2nd SS Panzer Corps successfully breached the 3rd Soviet defensive line, advancing towards the city of Prokhorovka. This development triggered a significant alarm within the Soviet High Command. This heightened tension ultimately led to a dramatic counterattack by the Soviets on July 12, 1943, a battle that would go down in history as one of the fiercest engagements of World War II. The Soviet defenders found themselves in a critical situation, facing the elite German formations of the entire war up front. The Totenkopf division held the left flank, Leibstandarte occupied the centre, and Das Reich commanded the right. The stage was now set for an epic showdown, the Waffen SS versus the elite armoured forces of the Soviet Union. General Paul Hauser, leading the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, had envisioned a continued push towards Prokhorovka after the initial success at Kursk. On the evening of July 11th, he issued orders for a traditional maneuver battle, planning the next day's attack. Recognizing the formidable Soviet presence with numerous anti-tank guns on the west slopes ahead of Prokhorovka, a direct assault by Leibstandarte seemed impractical. Consequently, a strategic plan was devised, initiating the attack north of the Psel River. Totenkopf was to advance northeast towards the Kartashevka-Prokhorovka road and then pivot southeast to approach the Soviet positions at Prokhorovka from an advantageous flank and rear position. The 1st and 2nd SS Panzer divisions were instructed to patiently wait until Totenkopf's offensive had sufficiently disrupted the Russian positions. Once the Soviets at Prokhorovka found themselves under pressure from Totenkopf, Leibstandarte was to join the fray, navigating through the primary Soviet defences on the west slope before Prokhorovka. Simultaneously, Das Reich, positioned to the right of Leibstandarte, was to advance eastward, securing the high ground south of Prokhorovka. Subsequently, Das Reich would turn south, bypassing Prokhorovka, to dismantle the Soviet line and create a breach in their defences. In terms of air support, the German 8th Flieger Corps was slated to focus its main efforts on aiding the 2nd SS Panzer Corps advance. Meanwhile, the 48th Panzer Corps to the west was assigned limited air resources for its operations. This meticulously coordinated plan aimed to leverage the strengths of each division within the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, maximising their collective impact on the upcoming battle at Prokhorovka. Without General Hauser's knowledge, during the night of July 11-12, Lieutenant General Pavel Rotmistrov took strategic action by relocating his elite 5th Guards Tank Army to an assembly area positioned just below Prokhorovka. This manoeuvre was a crucial step in readiness for a substantial armoured assault planned for the ensuing day. Unbeknownst to the German forces, the ominous sounds of Russian tank engines echoed through the night as the 18th and 29th Tank Corps mobilised and positioned themselves in their respective assembly areas to the east. The stage was being set for a significant confrontation, with Rotmistrov's 5th Guards Tank Army poised and prepared for a massive armoured offensive that would soon unfold against the unsuspecting German troopers. On July 11th, Vatutin issued a directive for the armies of the Voronezh front to launch an offensive the following day, forming the southern component of a broader Soviet offensive. In a strategic move, the Steppe front, inclusive of the formidable 5th Guards Tank Army, was deployed from reserve to confront and dismantle the spearheading German forces. The 5th Guards Tank Army received support from the infantry of the 5th Guards Army and the 69th Army. The assault was reinforced by 5 artillery regiments regiments, 1 artillery brigade and 1 artillery division. South of the 5th Guards Tank Army, the 2nd Guards Tank Corps and the depleted 2nd Tank Corps were tasked with attacking the positions held by the Das Reich Division. Positioned as a reserve north of Prokhorovka, the 5th Guards Mechanized Corps awaited further orders. Rotmistrov, the commander, directed his tankers to swiftly advance, aiming to engage the German armour at high speed and negate the advantages held by the Ferdinands and Tiger tanks. Particularly in terms of range and firepower, Rotmistrov believed that the agility of the T-34s would enable them to close in rapidly and secure effective flanking shots against the German heavy tanks. However, complications arose as Rotmistrov realized that Leibstandarte had already occupied the planned assembly areas for his forces. This unexpected development forced him to quickly revise his orders for the 5th Guards Tank Army, adapting the strategy to the altered circumstances on the battlefield. The impending clash at Prokhorovka was marked by the dynamic and evolving nature of the strategic dispositions on both sides. In the late hours of July 12th, the Soviet command received alarming intelligence that German forces had successfully crossed the northern Donets at Rzawes, also known as Rzawets, posing a significant threat to Rotmistrov's meticulously planned strategy. This development jeopardized the flank of the 5th Guards Tank Army and necessitated urgent action. Early on July 12th, Vatutin, the Soviet commander, issued orders to Rotmistrov instructing him to dispatch reinforcements to bolster the Soviet forces facing the 3rd Panzer Corps. In response to Vatutin's directive, Rotmistrov swiftly organized a task force under the leadership of his deputy, General K.G. Trufanov. This task force comprised the 26th Tank Brigade from the 2nd Guards Tank Corps, the 11th and 12th Guards Mechanized Brigades from the 5th Guards Mechanized Corps and the 53rd Guards Tank Regiment from the 5th Guards Tank Army. Additional units from the reserve were also attached to the group as it moved southward. Remarkably, Rotmistrov committed over half of his reserves to this essential ad hoc advance, strategically deploying them before the onset of the Battle of Prokhorovka. Simultaneously, Vatutin, recognizing the gravity of the situation, focused the efforts of the Red Air Force on the 48th Panzer Corps to the west. This allocation of air support aimed to counteract the threat posed by the German forces in that sector, underlining the dynamic and adaptive nature of the Soviet response to the evolving challenges of this sector.
Schicken Sie uns einen MG-42-Trupp.
Sagen Sie dem Kommandostab, wir greifen an. Sie sollen Verstärkung schicken.
Aufteilen! Feldwebel, übernehmen Sie mit 3 Männern die Flanke. Ich gebe Ihnen Feuerschutz.
Überprüfen Sie die Waffen.
By 0600, reports flooded into Leibstandarte's headquarters, indicating the unmistakable sound of numerous tank engines as the Soviet tank crews prepared for their impending advance. The tension in the air heightened as the Soviets initiated a brief artillery barrage between 0600 and 0615. As the final shells echoed through the battlefield at 0630, Rotmistrov transmitted the coded words, "Stal, Stal, Stal, Steel, Steel, Steel," signalling the decisive order to commence the attack. With this command, the armoured forces of the 5th Guards Tank Army surged forward, marking the beginning of their determined advance against the German positions. This was the start of the Battle of Prokhorovka. Descending from the west slopes preceding Prokhorovka, a formidable assembly of Soviet armour consisting of 5 tank brigades entered the fray. The 29th and 18th Tank Corps led the charge with their T-34s and T-70s, swiftly advancing and unleashing their firepower as they closed in on the target. Each of the 5 armoured brigades approaching the Leibstandarte's positions boasted an impressive arsenal, comprising 60 to 65 tanks in each brigade. Remarkably, as the Russian tankers manoeuvred down the corridor towards the German lines, they carried on their decks the soldiers of the 9th Parachute Division. This collaboration showcased a multifaceted assault, combining the speed and firepower of the tanks with the presence of ground forces ready for action. Approximately 500 tanks and self-propelled guns formed the vanguard of this massive offensive, advancing in 2 substantial waves. The first echelon comprised 430 tanks, while the second wave followed closely with an additional 70 tanks. The sheer scale and coordinated nature of this assault underscored the determination and strategic planning employed by the Soviet forces in their bid to break the German defences and turn the tide of the Battle of Prokhorovka. Fatigued and exhausted from the previous engagements, the troops of Leibstandarte found themselves caught off guard as they were not anticipating an immediate resumption of hostilities, expecting a lull until later in the day. This surprise element significantly impacted their readiness and response to the impending threat. A battalion from Leibstandarte's 2nd SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment was strategically positioned on the reverse slope of Hill 252.2, a position they had secured the day before. At the base of Hill 252.2 lay a Soviet anti-tank ditch, adding a layer of defensive challenge for the German forces. The Germans rushed to positions in the distances. They could see hundreds of pieces of Soviet armour headed right for them. At this moment, it was either go big or don't go home. As the Soviet offensive unfolded, German outposts initiated the alert by firing purple warning flares, signalling an imminent massive tank attack. This visual cue rapidly spread across the front, with purple flares lighting up the sky. Obersturmführer Rudolf von Ribbentrop, leading the 2nd Battalion of the 1st SS Panzer Regiment, recognized the gravity of the situation and understood that a major attack was underway. In response, he swiftly ordered his company of 7 Panzer IVs to mobilize. Crossing a pioneer-built bridge over the anti-tank ditch, they fanned out onto the lower slope of Hill 252.2. Meanwhile, on the crest of Hill 252.2, Joachim Peiper and his 2nd SS Panzer Grenadiers and their armoured half-tracks were facing an overwhelming assault and being overrun by the advancing Soviet forces. As Ribbentrop's tankers spread out on the lower slope, he observed the unfolding scene on the hillside. He recounted, "In front of me appeared 15, then 20, then 30, then 40 tanks. Finally, there were too many of them to count. The T-34s were rolling toward us at speed, carrying mounted infantry." The unexpected and overwhelming nature of the Soviet advance presented a formidable challenge to Leibstandarte's defences, setting the stage for a pivotal and intense battle on Hill 252.2. As the Soviet tankers charged down the western slope of Hill 252.2, an intense and fiercely contested tank battle erupted. The confrontation quickly escalated, with a Panzer IV next to Ribbentrop's right side burst into flames amid the chaos. The chaos was mentioned as insane. The Soviet tanks were smashing into the German lines, something this division hadn't seen yet during the entire war. One memoir recounted the heat of his tank, the non-stop shouts and panic across all radio transmissions, and the Panzers knew if this Soviet offensive wasn't dealt with sooner or later, they won't be leaving this Russian steppe alive. The Soviet tanks, while on the move, unleashed a barrage of fire, although the rapid pace compromised their accuracy. Rotmistrov's tactic to close in swiftly not only placed immense pressure on the German forces, but also disrupted the control and coordination of the Soviet tank formations. The battlefield dynamic became a maelstrom of maneuvering tanks and blazing gunfire. Ironically, Soviet intelligence had significantly overestimated the number of Ferdinands and Tigers within the 2nd SS Panzer Corps. In reality, there were no Ferdinands with the 4th Panzer Army, as they were all deployed to the north with the 9th Army. Among the 3 divisions of the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, only 15 Tiger tanks were available, with 10 positioned north of the Psel River alongside Totenkopf. Leibstandarte had a mere 4 operational Tigers, while Das Reich possessed just 1. The stark contrast between the anticipated and actual numbers further complicated the dynamics of the battle, revealing the strategic miscalculations on the part of Soviet intelligence. The scarcity of heavy German tanks in this sector was felt during this ongoing struggle for control of Hill 252.2. Over to the right, it was just as bad. As the combat unfolded on the vast battlefield southwest of Prokhorovka, the clash between Das Reich and the Soviet forces intensified. The German division initiated its assault from a strategic position several kilometers away, aiming to push deeper into enemy territory and help relieve Leibstandarte. The chaotic and intense nature of the engagement became apparent as the aggressive battle groups of the Soviet 2nd Tank Corps and 2nd Guards Tank Corps met the advancing spearheads figureheads of Das Reich, the German regiments, well equipped and highly trained, faced formidable opposition from Soviet battle groups, each comprised of 20 to 40 tanks, supported by infantry and ground attack planes. The thunderous roar of tank engines, the sharp cracks of gunfire, and the deafening explosions from artillery shells created a cacophony of war that echoed across the vast expanse of the battlefield. The clash between Das Reich and the Soviet elite armor and infantry units turned the landscape into a swirling chaos of dust, smoke, and the stench of burning metal. The Soviet forces, determined to defend their positions, launched fierce counterattacks against the advancing German divisions. Tanks maneuvered with agility, seeking advantageous positions, while infantry units fought fiercely in the trenches and open fields. Das Reich, recognizing the gravity of the situation, responded with coordinated tactics and strategic maneuvers. The German tank crews showcased their skill and precision, engaging in deadly duels with their Soviet counterparts. The battle groups of Das Reich regiments, facing a relentless onslaught, demonstrated resilience and adaptability, adjusting their formations to respond to the ever-changing dynamics of the battlefield. Meanwhile, on the left flank of the battlefield, a parallel struggle unfolded as elements of the Soviet First Tank Army endeavored to crush Totenkopf's bridgehead. The formidable SS division, Totenkopf, proved to be a formidable obstacle, successfully repelling repeated assaults from the 31st and 10th Tank Corps. In addition, elements of the 33rd Rifle Corps provided support to the Soviet forces while trying to fight the Totenkopf bridgehead. The battlefield on the left flank became a scene of intense clashes, with the distinct sound of tank treads and artillery fire echoing across the terrain. Despite the persistent efforts of the Soviet forces, Totenkopf's panzer group displayed unwavering resilience and determination. The SS division not only held its ground, but steadily advanced towards a critical road leading from the village of Katashevka. This particular road, extending southeast across the river, held strategic significance as it ultimately led into Prokhorovka. Totenkopf's calculated movement towards this key route indicated their intent to play a crucial role in the ongoing dynamics of the Battle of Prokhorovka. The division aimed to secure and control the vital road, thereby influencing the flow of reinforcements and supplies to both the bridgehead and the broader front lines. The progress of the Soviet armoured units faced a significant obstacle at the base of Hill 252.2 upon reaching the formidable anti-tank ditch that's now in German hands. Some vehicles collided with the 15-foot ditch, while others cautiously manoeuvred along its edge, searching for a viable crossing point. Intense exchanges of fire ensued between the Soviet armour and the two remaining companies of the 1st SS Panzer Battalion, situated on the opposite side of the ditch. In the midst of this engagement, Soviet tanks sought a passage across the obstacle. Simultaneously, as the initial waves of Soviet tanks passed, surviving Panzer Grenadiers under Piper's command emerged from trench lines. Their mission was to engage the Soviet paratroopers and counter the Russian tanks using magnetic-shaped charges. The clash intensified, resulting in the loss of 20 half-tracks from the battalion during the fighting. Some of these vehicles were destroyed as they attempted to ram the significantly heavier Russian tanks, a desperate effort to impede them from wreaking havoc on the company. Reportedly, soldiers of the 1st SS were physically fighting Soviet paratrooper in the trenches. At this stage, it was very bloody and fierce. Knives and spades, anything with a sharp end that could kill, were being used in the combat.
The deafening roar of tanks and the rhythmic march of Soviet infantry reverberated through the air. We braced ourselves, knowing that the odds were stacked against us. Our trenches were our only sanctuary as we clutched our AT gun and waited for the storm to hit. The first shots rang out, marking the start of a brutal ballet of hand-to-hand combat. The Soviets descended upon us with a ferocity that mirrored our desperation. The numbers were limitless. Chaos ensued as bayonets clashed, fists flew, and the cries of the wounded mixed with the savage yells of battle. I found myself locked in a desperate struggle with Ivan, our eyes locked in a wordless understanding of the life and death dance we were engaged in. The acrid stench of gunpowder and sweat filled the air as we grappled for control amidst the tumult of war. His breath was hot on my face as we strained against each other, our uniforms stained with the mud of earth. the distant sounds of tanks and artillery faded into the background as the world narrowed down to the struggle between two men fighting for survival. We exchanged blows, each strike, primal energy coursing through our veins. The taste of blood lingered in my mouth as I landed a desperate punch, momentarily gaining the upper hand. Yet I managed to overcome him. I remember looking around in the chaotic swirl of battle, the line between friend and foe blurred. It became a relentless, instinctive fight for survival, fueled by the fear of being overwhelmed by the human tide that sought to engulf us. The earth beneath us was churned into a muddy battleground, mirroring the internal conflict that raged within our hearts. As the day wore on, the struggle became a test of endurance. The ebb and flow of the battle shifted, and I found myself staggering, fatigue threatening to overcome me. And I remember looking down and seeing I had taken a bullet in my lower side. Yet, the determination to hold our ground, to resist the relentless advance, pushed me to muster the strength for one final, desperate push.
Sie den Kommandostab, wir greifen an! Sie sollen Verstärkung schicken!
Aufteilen! Feldwebel, übernehmen Sie mit 3 Männern die Flanke! Ich gebe Ihnen Feuerschutz!
Überprüfen Sie die Waffen! Wir wollen diesmal keine Ladehemmungen! Verteilt euch! Feldwebel, übernehmen Sie mit 3 Männern die Flanke! Ich gebe Ihnen Feuerschutz!
Above the battlefield, the Soviet 2nd and 17th Air Armies conducted a total of 893 sorties, surpassing the German Fliegerkorps, which executed 654 sorties over the southern part of the salient. Notably, the majority of the Soviet sorties on that day targeted the 48th Panzer Corps to the west and the 3rd Panzer Corps to the south. Despite the overall higher number of sorties by the Soviet air armies, the Luftwaffe maintained air superiority over the Prokhorovka battlefield. However, the effectiveness of aerial operations was hindered by low clouds in the morning and thunderstorms in the afternoon, impacting both sides. In the skies above Prokhorovka, the Luftwaffe exerted unparalleled dominance, deploying formidable formations of Stukas that unleashed havoc upon the battlefield. Among these aerial marauders were the experimental G2 variants equipped with the fearsome 3.7cm BK-37 cannons, spearheaded by the skilled Staffelkapitan Hans Ulrich Rudel. The ruthless efficiency of these aircraft was further amplified by the relentless presence of FW-190 fighter bombers and HS-129 ground attack planes armed with potent 3cm anti-tank cannons. This lethal combination ruthlessly targeted Soviet formations, particularly taking a toll on the 31st Tank Brigade, as the maelstrom of enemy artillery and air attacks rained down upon them. The 31st Tank Brigade bore the brunt of substantial tank losses, their armour succumbing to the destructive power of the Luftwaffe's onslaught. Despite valiant efforts to advance and reaching the Komsomolets State Farm by 10:30, the relentless waves of air assaults prevented any further progress, compelling the brigade to pivot to a defensive posture. The continuous absence of air cover further compounded their challenges, leaving them vulnerable to the merciless aerial onslaught. The 5th Guards Tank Army similarly faced challenges, reporting that enemy aircraft persistently hovered above their combat formations throughout the entire battle. In contrast, their own aircraft, particularly the fighter aviation, was deemed insufficient for effective defense. The role of air power in shaping the dynamics of the Battle of Prokhorovka was evident, with both sides contending with the complexities of aerial operations amid the challenging weather conditions. During the heavy fighting, a man known as Werner Wolf would earn himself the Iron Cross First Class for his actions. During the Russian assault on Hill 252.2, about 150 enemy tanks were headed to his company, and the original leader was killed, but Wolf took charge of a leaderless company, organising a swift defensive front and deploying anti-tank teams to save the SPWs from destruction. His actions laid the groundwork for a resilient defence. Wolf not only restored the fighting spirit of exhausted grenadiers, but also instilled an unshakable resolve that withstood the hostile attack, his leadership symbolizing resilience, engaging and neutralizing a T-34 in close combat, and killing the enemy's commanding general in a man-to-man struggle with his dagger. Wolf's actions were pivotal in turning the tide of adversity and creating a defense that would stop the Soviet advance. Back on the Leibstandarte battlefield, the fight persisted with the arrival of new Soviet tanks. Among the defenders was Michael Wittmann, leading a platoon of 3 Tigers. They advanced steadily through the chaotic scene, navigating through flames and smoke from burning grass, moving towards the T-34s. Michael's voice came through the radio, a note of urgency in his tone. "Attention, a substantial force of enemy tanks approaching from ahead. Many tanks." The crew braced themselves as 25 Soviet tanks from the 181st Tank Brigade appeared, initially disappearing into a valley before re-emerging over a rise. Facing this formidable threat, Wittmann calmly assessed the situation. The Tigers, like seasoned veterans, adjusted their position to meet the oncoming Soviet tanks. The clash unfolded with a series of calculated moves, each side vying for control in the ever-changing theatre of war. The air was tense, but Wittmann's leadership and the tactical maneuvers of his Tiger platoon would determine the outcome of this ongoing struggle on the battlefield. But it didn't end there. Commanding a group of 15 tanks, Soviet Captain P.A. Skripkin led a T-34 in a determined approach toward Wittmann's platoon. Shouting orders, he urged his fellow tankers, "Forward, follow me." In response, Wittmann's Tiger retaliated with 2 well-aimed rounds, hitting Skripkin's tank. The exchange took a toll, leaving Skripkin injured and prompting his crew to hastily rescue him from the now-burning T-34. Amidst the chaos, the T-34's driver, undeterred, re-entered the tank, turning it into a blazing spectacle as it surged forward. This fiery T-34 descended upon SS Staff Sergeant Georg Lutsch's Tiger, creating a dramatic and perilous clash on the battlefield. The close-quarters engagement underscored the intense dynamics of tank warfare during the Battle of Prokhorovka, where skill, strategy, and swift reactions played a pivotal role in determining the outcome of this insane battle. In his account of the battle, SS Staff Sergeant Georg Lutsch vividly described the intense moments on the battlefield. He recounted, "All of a sudden, about 50 enemy tanks came charging at us in an inverted wedge formation, utilizing small woods and hedges for cover. The Russian tanks approached at full speed, seemingly intent on engaging in close combat to compensate for our superior armor and armament. Battle order disintegrated in the face of the onslaught," Lutsch continued. "A Tiger was hit at point-blank range, erupting into flames. In the midst of the chaos, I managed to destroy 2 T-34s, one of which was advancing towards me engulfed in flames. In the nick of time, I skillfully evaded the approaching fiery threat, a moving bomb." However, the Soviets, despite enduring devastating losses, the Soviets displayed remarkable perseverance, maintaining an unyielding and relentless pressure on the battlefield. The tumultuous ebb and flow of the battle extended from the northern reaches of Oktyabrski to the southern expanse of Storojevoy. Leibstandarte's endeavours to advance were met with formidable opposition, with packs of Soviet tanks and infantry engaging in a ferocious back-and-forth struggle. The 1st Panzer Regiment, encountering determined Soviet resistance, could not advance. They had to fall back to Oktyabrskaya by 6 p.m. Simultaneously, the Soviet 181st Tank Brigade, reinforced by the 170th Tank Brigade, emerged as a potent threat, posing the possibility of severing the connection between Leibstandarte and Totenkopf at the strategic village of Vasilevka.
Verteilt euch! Feldwebel, übernehmen Sie mit 3 Männern die Flanke. Ich gebe Ihnen Feuerschutz.
Nein, nach unseren Informationen sind nur noch ein paar 100 übrig.
Gehen Sie in Abwehrstellung, bis wir wissen, wie viele es sind.
Right now, grenadiers from Leibstandarte found themselves grappling with an overwhelming onslaught of Soviet tanks and mounted infantry. The relentless and dynamic nature of the conflict highlighted the tenacity of both sides as they fiercely vied for control in this crucial phase of the Battle of Prokhorovka. The battleground stretching across the vast expanse from Oktyabrski to Storojevoy, the battle was as intense as ever, the noise deafening as usual, people screaming and brutality overwhelming. A crewman from a tank destroyer provided a vivid recollection of the relentless assault, encapsulating the harrowing experience with these words: "Salvo after salvo of Stalin's organs rained down upon our positions, with artillery and mortar shells in between. T-34 after T-34 rolled over the hill, 3, 5, 10, but what was the use of counting?" This poignant description vividly portrayed the overwhelming and ceaseless barrage of Soviet artillery and tank attacks. At a crucial moment in the battle, Soviet tanks successfully breached the defences, pressing forward toward Komsomolets and presenting a direct threat to Leibstandarte command post. The ensuing clash brought the enemy tanks into a point-blank engagement with Leibstandarte's artillery regiment, emphasising the intense and perilous proximity of the armoured confrontation. By late afternoon, heavy showers broke the sky and rain sizzled on the remnants of smouldering tank carcasses strewn across the battlefield. The roads, now transformed into muddy pits, added to the challenging conditions. In the sector occupied by the 29th and 18th Tank Corps, combat ground to a halt. Both sides were utterly drained by the harrowing ordeal of the battle, rendering them unable to sustain further offensive actions. The relentless fighting, combined with the adverse weather and deteriorating battlefield conditions, brought a temporary cessation to the intense struggle in this sector of the Battle of Prokhorovka. As July 12th drew to a close, the day of hell, Leibstandarte, with massive determination, successfully retained control of Hill 252.2, firmly standing their ground against the unrelenting assault from the 5 brigades of the 5th Guards Tank Army. The division's resilience in the face of the formidable Soviet offensive was sure pretty insane. Their steadfast commitment and formidable defensive capabilities stood tall. Despite the intense struggle required to repel the onslaught, Leibstandarte did not yield an inch of ground to the Soviets during this day. However, the cost of this hard-fought victory was costly. The division emerged from the battlefield physically and mentally exhausted, bearing the scars of a fierce and brutal encounter. The toll of the relentless conflict on both the soldiers and the apparatus of war underscored the magnitude of the challenges faced by Leibstandarte in preserving their hold on Hill 252.2. Totenkopf achieved a notable triumph by capturing Hill 226.6, marking a significant success in the unfolding Battle of Prokhorovka. Simultaneously, its panzer group demonstrated remarkable progress by advancing along the north bank of the Sel River, ultimately reaching the Kartashevka-Prokhorovka road, approximately 8 kilometers northwest of Prokhorovka. While Totenkopf's control over the newly acquired territory was somewhat tenuous, the division found itself strategically positioned to potentially execute an outflanking maneuver against the Soviet forces entrenched at Prokhorovka. This shift in position not only added a layer of complexity to the battlefield dynamics, but also opened up new and promising possibilities for Totenkopf, as the Germans could still potentially take the city of Prokhorovka. The strategic significance of reaching the Kartashevka-Prokhorovka road highlighted Totenkopf's ability to influence the course of the battle. The potential for an outflanking maneuver shows the division's tactical acumen, as Totenkopf stood at the crossroads of opportunity. Even though the division was completely outnumbered somehow, they came out with the opportunity to win this battle. Over to the far right, Das Reich, facing relentless pressure from the 2nd Guards Tank Corps and 2nd Tank Corps, found itself forced into a defensive stance. The division had to abandon its initially planned offensive maneuver, and its panzer group was constrained to mounting counterattacks against the advancing Soviet armour. This strategic shift shows the formidable challenges encountered by Das Reich in coping with the intense Soviet offensive during the ongoing Battle of Prokhorovka. The relentless push by the Soviet Tank Corps compelled Das Reich to reassess its approach and pivot from an offensive to a defensive posture. The inability to execute the planned maneuver highlighted the adaptability required in the face of the dynamically changing battlefield conditions. Das Reich's panzer group, now relegated to launching counterattacks, faced the daunting task of repelling the advancing Soviet forces. This shift in strategy and the defensive stance adopted by Das Reich painted a vivid picture of the complex and fluid nature of the Battle of Prokhorovka. The division, grappling with the overwhelming pressure from the Soviet tanks, showcased the adaptability and resilience required in the face of a formidable adversary on the Eastern Front. The ongoing conflict unfolded as a test of strategic ingenuity and tactical flexibility in the relentless struggle for control. The Soviet 5th Tank Army suffered substantial and severe losses in armoured units during the Battle of Prokhorovka. The initial offensive thrust initiated by the Soviet forces was met with effective resistance, compelling Rotmistrov to strategically shift his command from an offensive to a defensive posture. The significant toll on Soviet armour highlighted the ferocity and steep price of the engagement, prompting a reassessment of strategies as both sides adjusted to the changing dynamics of the battle. The battleground witnessed a considerable attrition of Soviet armoured forces, indicative of the intense resistance they encountered. In response to the formidable challenges and losses, Rotmistrov made a calculated decision to adopt a defensive stance, emphasizing the need to regroup and fortify their positions. The shift in strategy reflected the adaptability required in the face of the evolving circumstances on the Prokhorovka battlefield. On the night of July 12, Soviet commander Vatutin issued orders directing the forces facing the 2nd SS Panzer Corps and 3rd Panzer Corps to shift to a defensive posture on the upcoming day. The 1st Tank, 6th Guards Armies and the 32nd Guard Rifle Corps from the 5th Guards Army were instructed to persist in their offensive actions against the 48th Panzer Corps. Concurrently, the Red Air Force received directives to concentrate its efforts on targeting the 3rd Panzer Corps. Orders emanating from the 2nd SS Panzer Corps for July 13th outlined Totenkopf's objectives, requiring the division to consolidate its gains from the preceding day and then launch an attack across the Pasel River into the northwestern flank of Soviet forces encircling Prokhorovka. Leibstandarte received orders to fortify its front line and coordinate an attack on Prokhorovka from the south, aligning with Totenkopf's offensive from the northwest. Meanwhile, Das Reich was tasked with consolidating and reinforcing its front line in preparation for an offensive operation aimed at linking up with the 3rd Panzer Corps. These strategic directives delineated the coordinated efforts and objectives of both Soviet and German forces for the crucial day of July 13th, shaping the tactical landscape of the Battle of Prokhorovka. In the early hours of July 13th, Soviet forces initiated a reconnaissance in force against Totenkopf, a move that would shape the day's unfolding events. As the day progressed, this initial action evolved into localized counterattacks, spearheaded by the 5th Guards Mechanized Corps and the 33rd Guards Rifle Corps. These counterattacks strategically targeted Totenkopf's left flank, aiming to disrupt the German division's plans, particularly its intended southern offensive against the Soviet positions at Prokhorovka. This marked a significant development. First-hand accounts from the field vividly depicted the intensity of the clashes as Soviet units engaged Totenkopf in reconnaissance and subsequent counterattacks. The dynamic nature of the confrontation played out prominently on Totenkopf's left flank. The localized counterattacks by the Soviet forces showcased their commitment to disrupting the German offensive by any means necessary. At approximately noon, Leibstandarte received urgent orders to launch an attack northward, advancing toward the Psel River to the west of Prokhorovka. The objective was to consolidate its front line with Totenkopf's positions. However, this offensive faced formidable challenges as it encountered heavily fortified defensive positions held by the 33rd Guards Rifle Corps, bolstered by the remaining forces of the 18th and 29th Tank Corps. Regrettably, the attack proved unsuccessful against the resolute Soviet defences. Accounts from the battlefield detailed the difficulties faced by Leibstandarte as they attempted to breach the fortified lines of the 33rd Guards Rifle Corps, supplemented by the remnants of Tank Corps. The strategic maneuver to consolidate the front line with Totenkopf's positions encountered staunch opposition. The Soviet defences in this critical phase were too dug in at this point, and Leibstandarte had insufficient heavy tanks to be able to break the defence. During that afternoon, Totenkopf received orders to relinquish the narrow and increasingly vulnerable salient northwest of Prokhorovka and retreat to more defensible positions along the north bank of the Sel River. Despite persistent Soviet efforts to sever the salient and impede Totenkopf's withdrawal, the division managed to complete its retreat by nightfall. The strategic decision to abandon the exposed salient was imperative to reposition and secure more tenable defensive lines along the Sel River. Accounts from the field detailed the challenges faced by Totenkopf as they navigated through the attempts of the Soviet forces to disrupt their withdrawal. Nevertheless, the division's successful completion of the retreat highlighted its strategic agility and ability to adapt to the evolving dynamics of the battle. However, on this day, July 13th, Hitler issued urgent orders to terminate Operation Citadel, marking a crucial decision in the unfolding events of this battle. Kluge, the German field marshal, welcomed this decision as he was already in the process of withdrawing units of the 9th Army from the Kursk salient to confront the escalating Russian offensives. However, Manstein, a prominent German military commander, expressed profound disappointment with the decision. He contended that his forces were on the brink of a significant breakthrough. The 3rd Panzer Corps was on the verge of linking up with the 2nd SS Panzer Corps at Prokhorovka, and the operational reserve, the 24th Panzer Corps, was readily available. Manstein argued that halting the offensive at this critical juncture, just as victory seemed within reach, was a missed opportunity. Despite his pleas, Hitler, with a focus on the Western Front, was unwilling to prolong the offensive. Persisting in his argument, Manstein proposed continuing the offensive operations in the southern Kursk salient to destroy the Soviet reserves before finally terminating Operation Citadel. This strategic move aimed to deplete the Soviet fighting capacity in the sector for the remainder of the summer. Hitler eventually acquiesced to Manstein's proposal, agreeing to extend offensive operations in the southern salient until the German commander's objective was achieved. This episode highlighted the strategic differences and debates within the German command, with Manstein advocating for a continuation of the offensive to capitalize on potential successes, while Hitler, considering broader priorities, initially opted for a halt to Operation Citadel. Realizing the urgency of the situation and the imminent loss of the SS Panzer Corps, Manstein hastily formulated plans for Operation Roland. Recognizing the limited time available, he orchestrated a strategy that aimed to be executed within a few days. The core of the plan involved Das Reich launching an attack to the east and south, aiming to establish a connection with the 3rd Panzer Corps, which concurrently advanced to the northwest. Leibstandarte and Totenkopf were assigned to anchor the left and northern flanks of Das Reich in this coordinated maneuver. The ultimate objective was to achieve a crucial link-up, encircling Soviet forces in the process, with the anticipation that crippling the Soviet defense would lead to the imminent fall of Prokhorovka. The overarching goal of Operation Roland was to annihilate the Soviet armoured reserve concentrated in the southern sector of the Kursk salient. By doing so, the operation aimed to effectively thwart Soviet offensives for the remainder of the summer. Manstein's strategic vision sought to capitalize on this critical opportunity to reshape the dynamics of the Eastern Front and secure a significant advantage for the German forces engaged in the Battle of Prokhorovka and Kursk. The directives for Operation Roland were issued in the waning hours of July 14, 1943. However, following a meeting between Hitler and Manstein, Hitler countermanded the deployment of the 24th Panzer Corps to the Kursk salient, redirecting them on July 14th to support the 1st Panzer Army to the south. The assault for Operation Roland commenced at 0400 on July 15th. After a brief artillery barrage, the Der Führer Panzer Grenadier Regiment from Das Reich initiated the offensive, advancing toward the elevated terrain southwest of Prowess. In fierce house-to-house and hand-to-hand combat, they dislodged the remnants of the 2nd Guards Tank Corps from the village of Belenikino. The Panzer Regiment of the division successfully repelled a series of counterattacks, destroying several T-34s in the process. The Soviets were compelled to withdraw to the east, prompting Zhukov to order elements of the 10th Guards Mechanized Brigade out of reserve to reinforce the position. To the south, the 7th Panzer Division made contact with Das Reich. However, Trufanov, commanding the Soviet forces in the gap, was aware of the threat and conducted a fighting withdrawal. Although the Russians had to abandon a considerable number of anti-tank guns, the link-up failed to encircle a substantial portion of Soviet forces. Operation Roland, unfortunately, failed to achieve a decisive result. In accordance with orders issued late on July 15th, Totenkopf initiated a withdrawal from its positions north of the Psel River as the 2nd SS Panzer Corps assumed a defensive stance. The outcome of Operation Roland underscored the challenges and complexities faced by the German forces in their attempts to alter the course of the battle. On July 17th, the Soviet southwestern and southern fronts initiated a significant offensive, crossing the Mius and Donets rivers and targeting the southern wing of Army Group South. The offensive exerted pressure on both the 6th Army and the 1st Panzer Army. In the early afternoon of the same day, Operation Roland was officially terminated with an order for the 2nd SS Panzer Corps to commence withdrawing from the Prokhorovka sector back to Belgorod. The 4th Panzer Army and Army Detachment Kempf anticipated this order and began executing the withdrawal as early as the evening of July 16th. Leibstandarte's tanks were redistributed between Das Reich and Totenkopf, and the division was swiftly redeployed to Italy. Meanwhile, Das Reich and Totenkopf were dispatched south to confront the new Soviet offensive, diverting their focus from the Prokhorovka sector to the southern front. This marked the conclusion of Operation Roland and the Battle of Prokhorovka, a strategic shift in response to the evolving military landscape. The German forces, grappling with challenges on multiple fronts, adjusted their deployments to counter the mounting Soviet pressure in the south. In conclusion, determining losses in the Battle of Prokhorovka is challenging for both sides. German tank losses are subject to variation, partly due to the Wehrmacht's approach to counting and reporting equipment losses. Recoverable and repairable equipment was categorized differently from irreparable or abandoned equipment, influencing the reported figures for losses. The intricacies of the Wehrmacht's methodology add complexity to the task of establishing accurate German tank loss statistics. Similarly, obtaining reliable figures for tank and personnel casualties among the Soviets in the Battle of Prokhorovka proves to be a difficult task. The dynamic and intense nature of the conflict combined with the challenges of wartime documentation contributed to the ambiguity surrounding casualty figures on the Soviet side. In essence, the fog of war, differing counting methodologies, and the fluid conditions on the battlefield make it arduous to ascertain precise and comprehensive figures for losses on both the German and Soviet fronts during the Battle of Prokhorovka. On July 12th, the 2nd SS Panzer Corps reported a total of 842 casualties, comprising killed, wounded, or missing personnel. Remarkably, as the Germans maintained control of the Prokhorovka battlefield until July 17th, they were able to recover the majority of their disabled armoured vehicles during this period. German archival data specific to the 2nd SS Panzer Corps indicated a loss of 3 to 5 tanks on July 12th. Detailed records from the 3 divisions constituting the corps revealed that Leibstandarte suffered 3 tank losses in the battle, consisting of 2 Panzer IVs and 1 Tiger. The remaining 2 divisions within the corps reported strengths of 103 and 121 operational tanks and assault guns respectively by the end of July 16th. This demonstrated a remarkable ability to maintain operational tank strength, with the 2nd SS Panzer Corps almost reaching the same number of serviceable tanks it had at the beginning of the Prokhorovka battle. Further analysis of divisional returns indicated that the SS Panzer Corps had 294 operable panzers and assault guns on July 12th, decreasing to 251 on July 13th. Accounting for the possibility of some repaired tanks being reintroduced on July 13th, it was estimated that at least 43 SS Panzer Corps vehicles became inoperable during the Battle of Prokhorovka. Notably, this figure included all 10 Tigers belonging to Totenkopf and 1 belonging to Leibstandarte, but all inoperable Tiger tanks were deemed repairable with none written off. The overall estimate suggested that between 60 and 80 of SS Panzer Corps' armoured vehicles became inoperable during the intense combat on July 12th, in addition to ground forces Schlachtgeschwader 1 and its attached squadron of Stukas reported aircraft damage on July 12th, with a total of 11 planes damaged, 6 of which were categorised as total write-offs, all attributed to Soviet anti-aircraft fire. This comprehensive assessment provided insights into the material and personnel losses suffered by the 2nd SS Panzer Corps during the critical day of the Battle of Prokhorovka. The exact Soviet losses for July 12th are not precisely known, but military historians have provided estimates. Bergstrom estimated personnel losses at Prokhorovka to be as high as 5,500 men. Regarding equipment losses, Glantz and House estimated that the 5th Guards Tank Army lost a minimum of 400 tanks from their 800-plus inventory during the attacks on July 12th. Another estimate by George Naipe suggested a higher range, putting the losses in armour between 600 and 650 tanks. Koltunov and Soloviev estimated the 5th Guards Tank Army's initial strength at around 300 tanks and self-propelled guns. A document prepared by the 5th Guards Tank Army headquarters on July 17, 1943, summarised the combat losses incurred by the formation from July 12 to July 16, inclusive, covering all of its 5 corps as well as divisions, brigades and other smaller units directly subordinate to the Army headquarters. The document reported the following irrevocable losses, with 574 different heavy and light armour being destroyed, with no figures provided for support vehicles. Personnel casualties were reported as 2,940 killed in action, 3,510 wounded in action, and 1,157 missing in action, resulting in a total of 7,607 casualties. These estimates provide a comprehensive overview of the significant losses suffered by the 5th Guards Tank Army during the intense and pivotal Battle of Prokhorovka on July 12, 1943. But who really won the battle? Now, it is complicated. There is ongoing debate regarding the significance and outcome of the Battle of Prokhorovka. While it may be viewed as a tactical victory for the Wehrmacht, it falls short of constituting an operational triumph. The extensive destruction of Soviet tanks resulted in a temporary degradation of the 5th Guards Tank Army's striking power, yet the Germans were unable to seize Prokhorovka or make a breakthrough into open ground. Although the Soviet massive armoured attack on July 12th failed to annihilate the 2nd SS Panzer Corps or force the Germans onto the defensive, the attacking German units were fatigued and their advance was halted. Neither the 5th Guards Tank Army nor the 2nd SS Panzer Corps achieved their objectives for the day, while the Germans were still successful in defending for that day. In general, the battle is often considered a tactical success for the Germans due to the substantial losses inflicted on Soviet armour. However, despite this, there was no decisive German breakthrough at Prokhorovka. With the conclusion of Operation Citadel, the strategic initiative definitively shifted to the Red Army. The Battle of Prokhorovka thus stands as a complex and multifaceted episode in the broader context of the Eastern Front, marked by both successes and limitations for both the German and Soviet forces. Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we've thoroughly covered every aspect of this battle, bringing this intense showdown and video to a close. What an incredible journey it has been. Both sides displayed unwavering valour, earning our utmost respect. We trust you've gained some valuable insights throughout this experience, and I've truly relished presenting it to you. Don't forget to explore our Patreon and Instagram links below for more exclusive content. Your continuous support across our videos means the world to us. We hope you've enjoyed this installment, and we look forward to catching you in our next video. Until then, goodbye for now.